Dzień dobry, panie ministrze, to będziemy zaczynać. Paweł, zaczynamy. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the high-level panel, 5 years of the Paris Agreement. My name is Karolina Zbetniewska, and I am the editor-in-chief at EURACTIV Poland Media. We have organized this anniversary debate together with the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. Let me now introduce our honorable, excellent experts that make the climate policy actually happen. So today we have with us the Polish Minister of Climate and Environment, Michał Kurtyka, Elina Bardram, Head of International Relations Unit at DG Klima, European Commission, Romeo Bertolini, Deputy Director at the NDC Partnership Support Unit in Bonn, Katarzyna Guzek, Press Speaker at Greenpeace Poland, Niklas Höhne, Founding Partner at the New Climate Institute, Hafida Lywell, Director of Legal Affairs at United Nations Framework Convention of Climate Change, UNFCCC, and last but not least, our seventh panelist, Maria Andrzejewska, Director of the UNEP Grid Warsaw Center. So, a brief introduction to the topic. As the title goes, we are here today to celebrate the 5th birthday of the Paris Agreement. It is the first ever universal, legally binding global climate change agreement adopted at the Paris Climate Conference COP21 in December 2015. The Paris Agreement sets out a global framework to avoid dangerous climate change by limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees and pursuing efforts to limit it to 1.5 degrees. The agreement contains also a ratchet mechanism by which nations must update their commitments every 5 years. The first deadline is on 31st December. 2 days ago at Saturday's Climate Ambition Summit, many world leaders strengthened their plans, called Nationally Determined Contributions, NDCs, to cut emissions by 2030. The EU last Friday confirmed its pledge of a 55% cut by 2030. All the member states of the European Union signed up to this goal, including Poland. So let's now move to Poland and to Polish Minister of Climate and Environment, Mr. Michał Kurtyka, a chairman of COP24. So Minister Kurtyka, welcome. And my question is, what is the Paris effect on Poland after these 5 years? How does the implementation of the Paris guidelines look like so far? According to the recent report, the Climate Change Performance Index 2021, that analyzed how 61 countries deliver goals of the Paris Agreement, Poland places as the 48th country out of 61, just to remind, with one of the lowest positions in Europe. Why so?
Thank you very much. Thank you for this introduction. Thank you for the invitation. And it's my pleasure to be with you 2 years exactly, day for day, after the official ending of COP24 in Katowice, which was supposed to finalize its discussions on the 14th of December 2018. And for those who were there, who were present, also they recall how much complex and complicated it was to achieve a compromise in Katowice. And I think that Katowice contributed very much to this Paris effect that you are speaking about, because without Katowice, there would not be the Paris Agreement. We had the agreement in 2015 regarding principles, but what we had to deliver were the details and implementation guidelines, 100 pages of Katowice rulebook, which we negotiated here in Poland and to be more precise, in Katowice, the heart of Silesia. We didn't stop on the 14th of December. COP24 actually lasted till 15th of December. During the night from Saturday to Sunday, we finally had the agreement, and I was very happy to gavel it and to make sure that we have the Katowice rulebook serving Paris Agreement. This is, I think, an extremely important moment for all of us, as Paris and Katowice enabled a transition which we are right now being part of. And in the last couple of weeks only, we have the alignment between major emitters of the world who all agree that going for the objectives of Paris Agreement is their priority. So we had Japan declaring climate neutrality by 2050. We had Korea following. We have China going for carbon neutrality by 2060. And of course, the leader, European Union, which declared already going for climate neutrality at the last council in December 2019. And soon we expect the implementation of this announcement from President-elect Joe Biden on the side of United States to come back to Paris Agreement. So we will have 65% of global emissions, 70% of global of world's economy, which are going for climate neutrality by mid-century, by 2050. And without Katowice, it would not be possible, because we wouldn't simply know what is the operational framework. And starting from the 1st of January 2021, this operational framework will replace the Kyoto Protocol, and we will exactly know what does it mean for a single country to present its nationally determined contributions. What are the guidelines? How should it be communicated? How should it be built? What statistics are to be taken into account? So Katowice, again, as I said, put into motion Paris principles. Now, of course, when you ask about Poland, it has been also the question very much debated here in Poland after Katowice, that what should be Polish energy transition looking like? And we have this heritage. We started the transition with three very important challenges. First of all, in 1989, 97% of Polish energy mix was provided by coal. That's a completely unique situation, including in the region. None of our neighbors, we are talking about Czechoslovakia, Ukraine, Lithuania, had the similar situation. All of them had their energy mixes diversified. The single example of monoculture was Poland. And because many of these energy facilities were built in late 70s, in 80s, then were relatively new. So it was difficult to engage a reform at that time. Second, very important dependence, the one linked with gas. And very difficult to diversify the supply of gas coming from only one direction. And last but not least, social feasibility. Still in Poland, we are paying more than double of the cost of energy when it is compared to household incomes as related with our Western neighbors. So in Poland, an average household pays for energy-related expenses around 10% of its available income. It is to be compared with 5% in Germany. So the room for maneuver in order to increase the prices of energy and of media is much more limited than the one with our neighbors in Western Europe. So this is our heritage. But right now we have our solution. And you spoke about Paris effect. I think we can speak also about Katowice effect here in Poland. because the energy transition is gaining momentum. And we have a very rapid acceleration right now of Polish energy transition, which is driven by bottom-up democratized energy supply done by households. We have more than 150,000 households, which only this year, very particular COVID year, added on their rooftop a PV panel. 350,000 prosumers at the end of the year or at the beginning of the very early beginning of the next year in Polish system. We are heading to 1 million prosumers by 2030. We are moving very strongly in terms of modernization of houses, increasing energy efficiency of our houses. And we have presented a new energy policy till 2040, which foresees a very rapid development of zero-emission energy sources. By 2040, a new zero-emission system should be put in place so that it will enable this energy transition in the case of Poland. Maybe I just stop here and I'll be very happy to continue later on, but I think we have also excellent speakers. So I stop right now regarding the plans of Polish energy transition. Also, it is important, and maybe last thing that I would like to underline, that it's based on 3 pillars. Just transition, so making sure that nobody is left behind and that we are able to provide a solution to our coal-dependent regions and create new alternative sources of incomes for families and for these regions, that we are creating this zero-emission energy system, which is based on dispersed energy, offshore and nuclear, and that we are at the same time able to tackle air quality with very ambitious program by 2030 to decrease smog in Polish cities, to electrify our transport, including starting from 2025, to ban non-electric or non-hydrogen buses from the biggest agglomerations here in Poland. So really an extremely ambitious agenda which tackles this challenge that Poland heritages. And we have also the results of the summit in Brussels last week, Tuesday and Friday, with the entire union supporting the same goal. Thank you for this introduction.
Thank you for setting the stage. So now off to Katarzyna Guzek from Greenpeace. What, in your view, has been this Paris effect, and what's your approach as regards the last 5 years in the Polish context?
Thank you very much. Thank you for invitation, and I'm really happy to take part in this debate on the Paris Agreement, especially because Paris Agreement brought us hope to the whole environmental movement, and actually everybody that has this willingness to actually act on climate. So 5 years ago, we were happy that Paris Agreement were in place. And 5 years later, today, we can say our hope was not damaged, but it's more challenging to actually keep this hope and to keep the faith that we are actually able to tackle the most catastrophic effects of the climate change. Just to say that since 2018, since IPCC published a special report on 1.5 Celsius degrees, we are all aware that we have to do everything possible to keep the temperature rising on the level of 1.5 Celsius degrees. Currently, our temperature has risen up to 1.2 Celsius degrees, which means that we do not have time to postpone actions. We do have declarations from countries. We do have climate neutrality declarations from big economies. as maybe a reminder, Poland did not support EU climate neutrality by 2050, was not supporting this goal. And therefore, we are afraid that Poland is not willing to take a real action to actually to make the just transition happen. Mr. Kurtyka mentioned different numbers. I wanna add one more number to this. Polish mining sector gathered gain us only this year only 2020 3.3 billion zloty of loss, and that's only one number that is showing us where are we on the path of this just transition. We are not getting any closer to the just transition, at least not yet. What I'm missing from the Polish government is definitely a lack of the coal phase-out date. There are only few countries in the European Union that did not declare a coal phase-out date. We know from the scientific papers that Poland should quit coal by 2030. And if we look at what Polish government is doing, for example, during a conversation with the miners and mining unions, proposing that the mining industry will still be alive in 2049, it's something that is not, it's not corresponding with the reality. It's not corresponding with the crisis that we are facing now and the catastrophe that we are heading to, especially taking into account that Polish emissions are still rising, despite the fact that we signed Paris Agreement and despite the fact that 2 years ago the government, actually the head of delegations, negotiated Katowice rule book.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now I'm audible. So now after Elina Bardram, Head of International Relations Unit at DG Klima, which is a Directorate General for Climate Action at the European Commission. Where in particular is the EU? Now let's move from Poland to the European Union. Where is EU on its way to deliver the Paris Agreement, and how does the EU Green Deal help in achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement?
Thanks very much, Carolina. Thank you very much for having the European Commission participate in this panel on such an important occasion as we kind of remember the Paris achievements and celebrate the progress so far. Now, to your question, very briefly, as I do hope that there will be some time for conversation as we move along. The EU is definitely among the forerunners of implementation of the Paris Agreement. Already when we went to Paris, we had a leaders level agreed ambitious target, that of at least 40% by 2030. And ever since Paris, we have been responding to the latest scientific reports by developing a stronger long-term vision in terms of net zero emissions by 2050. And only last Friday did our leaders agree on the enhanced NDC target of at least 55% by 2030. This in itself represents a severe and a major step change in the EU ambition, and it also reflects the vision as articulated in the European Green Deal. Now, the European Green Deal is not about climate policy or politics. It is about modernization of the European economic paradigm. It is about preparing EU to carve its share in the low carbon markets of the modern economy that we see coming our way, and with the political conditions evolving to something that's much more favorable to accelerating global transition to low carbon economy. We want the EU to remain in the forefront of this transition and to be able to reap the benefits in terms of competitiveness and innovation and research and development. Of course, as Minister Kurtika has underlined, it will be of paramount importance that no one is left behind. We need to provide viable and acceptable options to our society for that of the low carbon or the high carbon economic model. We have to provide alternatives to for more sustainable transportation, for more sustainable buildings, and for new types of jobs and opportunities in the business world. I think the EU will continue its leadership, not just domestically, but also in terms of prompting action by others. And I think that the deliverables that we saw over the weekend on the occasion of the Climate Ambition Summit speak volumes of the power of the UN system, but also the power of the EU's outreach, as we have been working very hard in the area of climate diplomacy, including bilateral, but also multilateral platforms such as the G20 and G7. Thank you so much. I'll stop my first intervention here.
Thank you very much. And I encourage also at the bottom, also in the very first round, but under the condition that you keep the overall answers to 3 minutes. So now off to Professor Niklas Höhne, the founding partner at the New Climate Institute. I would like to ask you about the Paris effect again, but this time on Germany and in Europe in general. Is, in your view, the 55% commitment that was set for the 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement good enough? Will it save us?
Yeah, thanks first for having me here. A pleasure to be part of this panel. First, on the Paris effect, I think, well, Paris has moved us a step forward, but we still have a lot of work to do. Let me stick with the positive first. I think the idea of going to net zero greenhouse gas emissions was placed in the Paris Agreement, I think, for the first time, and it was agreed there as a global goal. And now we have more and more countries taking that goal of net zero greenhouse gas emissions for themselves, climate or carbon neutrality. And we have seen in the last months a wave of commitments of countries saying that in the long run, they want to phase out completely coal, oil, and gas. That is very good and very important that this is happening. And in the Climate Action Tracker or in the Mission Gap Report, we calculated quickly what that would mean for global temperature increase. So if all of these countries that are discussing it would really meet their climate neutrality goals, then all of a sudden the Paris Agreement goals of well below 2 or 1.5 come in reach again. So we calculate kind of 2.1 degrees. Which could come out if all countries do it. So this is much, much better than what we've seen in the last 10 years, basically, where we always said it would go in the direction of 3 degrees, which would definitely be catastrophic climate change. So something to avoid. But there I come to your question. Long-term ambition is very good and very welcomed. It's the first and necessary step, but it's not sufficient. What's missing is short-term action. And there we see a huge gap. So emissions, if you take all countries, what they're doing right now, global emissions will be kind of leveling off until 2030, even with the NDCs and even with more or less, maybe a bit lower after Saturday, but still the general trend is clear. It's still kind of leveling off. And if you compare that to what really needs to happen, which is halving global emissions in the next 10 years, that's what needs to happen. So we are not a little bit off, we are totally off with short-term action. And I very much welcome that from the climate point of view, that EU has taken the courage to increase its ambition. That was really missing in the past. Only small countries so far had proposed new commitments under the Paris Agreement. Now the EU as a big player is coming on board, China as well, which is good. But again, if you globally need to halve global emissions in the next 10 years, then you can compare that whether the EU's 55% goal is doing that, and unfortunately it is not. but still every country has to decide themselves what their fair share is. Globally, we need to halve emissions in 10 years, and the 55% target does not yet do it.
Thank you very much. Now off to Hafida Laiwell, Director of Legal Affairs at UNFCCC. What, in your view, is that we have achieved, and still what is there to be achieved as regards the climate protection and fighting the climate change? From the perspective of the person working on the UNFCCC, could you present what has been the most important achievements of the Paris Agreement, and what should be the further improvement in order to reach the goal of below 2 degrees, or at best 1.5 degrees?
Thank you, Carolina. It's a great question. And I think for me, there are two main achievements that the Paris Agreement has done to us. It's from the perspective of the UN, it's near universality and its entry into force. It was adopted in 2015. It entered into force very shortly after that. And within the UN experience, that's actually very uncommon. We usually need many years, as the Doha Amendment has shown, to have any treaty enter into force. So that's an amazing achievement. It really speaks about what you discussed, Katarzyna, right? The hope that the Paris Agreement and the willingness to work together it showed. The second thing is, and this is very striking to me, especially because from my legal perspective, this is also quite uncommon. The Paris Agreement has achieved an incredible feat, which is to have imposed normative actions based on trust. By that I mean that it put together a framework based on how parties working together to mitigate, adapt, implement all the goals of the Paris Agreement together, including by reporting together, by promoting compliance and implementation, and also to get together every 5 years, as you mentioned earlier, for a global stocktake and collective progress assessment. And that alone, the fact that nobody is questioning that this is how we're going to proceed, and nobody is going to question, thanks to Minister Kurtika's support, how those goals are going to be done. I mean, at the implementation level through those guidelines. That is, for me, is something that is quite remarkable. And the need for action is also unquestionable. Nobody has ever questioned that we need to submit NDCs. That's something that we take that for granted, but it's an achievement. The issue, though, is that as we see this interconnected world and the commitment to the principle, the summit on Saturday also showed that in the 5 years since the Paris Agreement was adopted, we have collectively struggled in terms of ambitions. There's been, as the UNSG said, very little results, and that the current trajectory is going towards the 3 degrees at the end of the century if we were to implement the NDCs, the unconditional NDCs, as they are now. So that really shows also that in 2020 with COVID-19, with fiscal measures that subsidized fossil fuel, with the rolling of a number of environmental policies and legislation in a number of countries, we have shown our limitation into this system of trust and the principle. And so the second improvement, besides the ambition that we need to work on and that some of you have touched upon, is what the SG himself called the emergency declaration. We need to be very strong about how we can put in place and leverage innovation, technology, intellectual property especially, to put together a system by which we can better support infrastructure to have a transformation into a solution-based source of energy. But also, I guess because I'm a lawyer here, for me, one of the major improvement is support on policy making and legislation. I think there's a number of MPs participating in the webinar today. So it's very important to understand that the mindset shift that we need to make the implementation of the Paris Agreement goals substantively completed by the end of the century or by 2050 or 60, if possible at all, is that we need to leverage everyone action in a very concerted way. And that is something that we can actually achieve. And I think, having observed how since March we had fiscal measures that promoted fossil fuel energies, and now in September and in December, even since Saturday, how this has totally shifted in the mindset of government, of subnational authorities, local authorities, and non-party stakeholders who are in integral part of the work that we are conducting. And we're seeing that in the UNFCCC. I think I've talked more than 3 minutes. I'm going to stop here.
Thank you very much. So scaling up ambition, the emergency declaration, and the leverage of concerted actions. Thank you very much. Very constructive. Let's start working on that. Now to Romeo Bertolini, Deputy Director at the NDC Partnership Support Unit in Bonn. The Paris Agreement is not only about Poland, not only about European Union, not only about our privileged developed countries. We need universal cooperation to save our planet. And so the Paris Agreement also aims to strengthen countries' ability to deal with the impacts of climate change and support them in their efforts. How does the NDC partnership assist countries and other non-state actors in accelerating climate action through NDC implementation?
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you, colleagues, for all this insightful information already, Minister. Yes, well, Hafida just said it. The idea is an idea of universal action, and is an idea of helping each other as well, and those helping those that suffer the most. And as we all know, industrialized countries such as Germany, which is my home country, have been responsible, of course, for the causes of climate change. Now, with Paris, we've been experiencing an enormous push in this field, and it was a great celebration. We had the NDCs. We had these documents, but by no means was it clear and what the NDCs are to many of those that actually deal with topics that are related to climate change. I'm talking about ministries of finance, ministries of planning, ministries of agriculture, and so on and so forth, and not only governments, of course, but also the private sector. So this underlying principle of the Paris Agreement and breaking this down into tangible action with support of the international community and targeting this to the needs of the countries that they expressed in their NDC was one of the founding reasons, so to speak, for the NDC partnership that started. This process started already in Paris in 2005, and in 1 year, Germany, Uganda, Vietnam, Colombia, the World Bank, UNDP, and the World Resource Institute turned their heads around the idea of making this a common effort. Now, 5 years after that, we have more than 186 countries and institutions on board. Developing countries, 94 countries. And the idea is really that the NDC partnership is not necessarily providing support itself or the secretariat what I'm in, but we are bundling and trying to create the synergies of all those that provided the support, the finances, the technical assistance to the countries, especially in the South, that do not have the capacity to develop the NDCs, breaking it down, and not least also the finances to make sure that they are on a pathway that integrates their development path and their sustainable development concept, basically, with the idea of reducing the effects of climate change and being low CO2 emissions in any case. So this kind of combination was the idea. A lot of work has been done in the past 5 years with more than 70 countries engaging on a very thorough process with support of the those that are around, partly also around this table, like the European Commission, UNFCCC. Niklas, we know very well from these kind of activities. And of course, Poland is more than welcome to join the NDC partnership and join the forces of this, because just transition is certainly a very, very important header also for this on a global scale.
Thank you very much also for the final call to our government. Now off to Maria Andrzejewska, who will be taking the floor as the last in the first round. Maria Andrzejewska is the director at the UNEP Grid Warsaw, while UNEP Grid belongs to the Grid Global Resource Information Database Network established by the United Nations Environment Program. It operates since 2091. So let's look at what pandemic has done for the environment and climate. How can we wisely achieve the green recovery in line with the Paris Agreement and broaden goals that it represents? Please unmute yourself.
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you for the question, and thank you first of all for the invitation to participate in this, to be a part of the panel. Just one remark, my organization was established in 1991, so we will celebrate around 30 years. We'll celebrate 30 years next year. To answer your question, I think that all of us know that pandemic is a kind of a warning from nature, and that we have to act on climate change, but also on nature laws, biodiversity laws, and also pollution. According to the Emission Gap Report 2020, which was mentioned by one of the previous panelists, the report which was released by UN Environment Programme last week, green pandemic recovery could cut up to 25% of the emissions we would expect to see in 2030 based on policies in place before COVID-19. So in fact, thanks to the pandemic recovery, we could cut up the emissions by 25%. And when we speak about the green recovery, we mainly focus on the zero emissions technologies, the infrastructure, reducing fossil fuel subsidies, closing coal plants. But what I would like to stress, and what UN Environment Programme is stressing, that's the promotion of nature-based solutions. And that's one of the very, very important part of the recovery. So to protect and to expand natural carbon sinks, such as forests, mangroves, salt marshes, and seagrass meadows, and of course forests, which are crucial for the healthy planet. I would like to mention that according to the calculations by UN Environment, every $1 invested in land restoration is expected to generate up to $10 in returns for society. That's a great benefit. The beginning of next year, UN will launch the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, which is focused on preventing, halting, and reversing the degradation of forests, land, and other ecosystems worldwide. This is a huge opportunity to tackle the biodiversity loss and climate change. And maybe just to conclude that the World Economic Forum estimated that business opportunities across nature could create 191 million jobs by 2030. So it's important, and it's worth to focus on these also solutions, nature-based solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope everyone will feel more motivated for real action now. So I would like to come back to Minister Kurtyka. I have two questions in one for the beginning, and also one question from one of our viewers, our participants. So first, my double question. Poland, with its still high dependence on coal, is one of the most difficult economies in Europe to conduct a process of energy transformation. What are the main priorities of the ministry, and therefore what actions are currently undertaken in order to reduce GHG emissions produced by Poland? Plus, how does Polish lack of proper commitment to decarbonize and build carbon neutral economy stands with strong climate ambitions of the EU? And the question from Johnny Dąbrowski from Fridays for Future Poland. It's been 5 years since Paris Agreement was signed. Has Poland fulfilled all the requirements planned for the last 5 years and by the Paris Accord? Have we reduced the amount of greenhouse gas emissions we promised to cut 5 years ago?
Thank you very much. I think that indeed we are struggling with three challenges, and that concerns Poland with its historic situation, but that concerns also EU in quite a big scope. So first of all, we are living in an interconnected world. It was said by Hafida, if I recall correctly. And this fact means that we are also in the world which is a system of communicating vessels. So when we are decreasing our emissions here in the European Union or in Poland, the question is to what extent we are influencing other countries in the world. Because if the only effect of our action is to translate emissions to other countries, then I think it's kind of an egoistic strategy which doesn't make sense. Because so what we think is that engaging into a comprehensive climate strategy, it's tackling it from a civilizational point of view. How to deliver goods, how are we living, how are we moving, all elements must be taken into account. In this sense, it is a process which is society-wide. And if we only end up with outsourcing emissions to other countries and also outsourcing jobs to other countries, then I think we will not fulfill the mission, which is to create a new model for sustainable development, climate-friendly development, which puts our planet, but also people's needs at the heart. So when we are speaking about this extremely challenging transformation, we must think of that. Then there is a second issue, and you asked about this, Poland's very specific starting point. Yes, indeed, we have examples in Wałbrzych area, in Silesia, in Bytom, where mines were closed in the mid-90s in a very abrupt manner. And thousands or dozens of thousands of people went to unemployment. And interestingly, what we see is the effect of these closures still today, 25 years after. When you compare Katowice with Bytom in terms of unemployment rate, you see that one is 3 times higher than the other. And these are neighboring cities. And part of the answer is in this abrupt manner of not taking into account the social dimension, but moving too quickly and not smoothly enough on this transition. And when we are speaking about climate neutrality, Poland does subscribe to European Union's target of 2050 climate neutrality. It is the conclusion of the European Council. And all 27 leaders of European Council also recognized that one country, namely Poland, has a very specific starting point. So when we are all agreeing about going for climate neutrality by 2050, we also recognize that one country has a very different situation from the others. And when we are acting, we are moving very quickly. Right now, Polish emissions from the energy sector are declining, but the emissions from the transport sector in an entire European Union are rising. So we have to do something with this. And what is the input of countries for the Paris Agreement is this naturally determined contribution. We already discussed about nationally determined contribution based on 40% reduction target. Right now, leaders accepted a 55% target, which raises the ambition and which in fact answers also to the challenge that Niklas Höhne raised. It's the short-term action. Well, in this field, 10 years, it's a lot of time, but when we see the inertia of how difficult and how much time it needs to change a social ecosystem, then we understand that we need also to plan for years to come and the change doesn't happen overnight. And what is extremely important is that also the solidarity between states and inside our states. When we are speaking about tackling such a challenge, we cannot leave the ones who are poorer or the ones who are more vulnerable in the same situation as the richer one and the ones who have already quite a zero emission systems. So we need really to make sure that the balance is preserved within European Union, but also within our societies. So this is why when we are putting in place a policy to modernize our housing, then we have a differentiated support for the poorest one, because that is the way we should respond as society, having a solidarity at the heart of it. And when we are speaking about Poland, we have an extremely ambitious plan, unprecedented energy policy, which is on the table, going from 75% reduction of coal within 20 years to 11 up till 28%. So this is an unprecedented change for Polish energy system. And we have during the next 20 years to be able to build a new zero emission system. And for the existing system, it took 60 or 70 years to build it. Within 20 years, we must be able to build another zero emission system and tackle at the same time all the challenges that we are facing also as Polish societies, which are linked with air quality. And so this is basically, and that would be my last call, a capital-intensive revolution. When we are speaking about previous technologies, gas, coal, whatever, these are labor and resource-intensive. Now we are moving to a capital-intensive revolution, electric cars, photovoltaic panels, windmills. This is costly to build, but once you build it, it's quite cheap to operate. But we must be able to gather enough capital to do it. So going for this 20 years transition, we have to have the support of EU budget, and this is also the result of the budgetary discussion and of the discussion regarding climate change at the last European Council. So it was extremely important that we have also these inputs as prerequisite for a successful transition in Central Europe.
Thank you very much, Minister. So now I will go to Elina Wardram because in a way, European Union has been called up. So I would like to ask you if you could anyhow comment on the minister's words, but also I would like to ask you your own question. So taking the special conditions of Poland that Minister explained, how to be realistic about the transformation of the energy scene in Poland.
Thanks very much, Karolina. And indeed, the minister raises a lot of very pertinent points. In a way, the fact that already within Europe, we have to balance between different countries, different regions, priorities and challenges in order to find a way to navigate our process ambitions forward, puts us in a very good position internationally to be sensitive to other countries' views and perspectives as well. Nobody is saying that the transition is going to be without a cost. As you know, 30% of the MFF and 35% of the recovery and resilience funds that have been mobilized through the virtue of the multi-annual financial framework and the Next Generation EU Recovery Programme, respectively, will go towards climate action and facilitating a faster transition to climate neutral, carbon neutral, and indeed net zero emissions economy. That is something that requires action by all. It is something that has to be inclusive. It has to provide a space for industry, for the citizen, and for the governments with their different parts and departments to contribute into the conversation to find the solutions. The European Commission does not have the panacea. We don't have a silver bullet that will fit into all circumstances. And this is why continued dialogue between the member states and the central administration of the Union is required. And that conversation must remain inclusive and participatory, so that there is no imposition of views, but rather a process that helps us move forward in the modern, more active and more competitive way that allows us to indeed keep that forerunner position in the global game for net zero emissions. And there's a lot of very promising developments in Poland in that respect, but I think time doesn't allow us to go into that detail. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask Hafida Lywell, do you think, because there is often this doubt, this concern raised, do you think that European Union, with its ambitions in terms of climate, are we not naive, taking that not all the world agreed to such ambitious climate goals? Will we remain competitive in the 30 years perspective?
Thank you, Carolina. That's I think Minister Kurtyka and Elina from the EC have really touched upon one of the very core issues that we have when trying to achieve the goals under the Paris Agreement, which is, what do you do with your existing infrastructure if you're aiming at a fair, just, inclusive transition and moving towards a transformation in terms of energy sources? And I think when I refer to that to a number of youth movement who have said, but why does it take, another 3 or 40 years or even 50 years to become carbon zero economies? Why does it take so much time? And from my perspective, from the UN, having provided some support to a number of countries in trying to adopt policies or legislation to implement the Paris Agreement and facilitate that effort, one of the major hurdles was you have invested a lot of money, a massive amount of money in infrastructure for fossil fuel, right? And Minister Kurtyka talked about that as well as Elina. But what we are seeing now is, and Elina, I think you mentioned that, is that we cannot afford to miss this economic panacea that is this green revolution. So the European countries, I don't think that naive. I think we can become competitive
Sorry for interruption. I just don't want to allow minister to leave without saying goodbye. I'm really sorry, Hafida, for this little interruption, and I would like to thank you, Minister, for being with us. We thumbs up for Poland in terms for meeting the ambitious EU climate goals. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much for your invitation, and great to see all of you. And it's an excellent manner to celebrate the 5th anniversary of Paris Agreement. And so let's move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much again. So coming back to you, Hafida, once again, sorry for interrupting.
Totally fine. I was happy to see Minister Kurtyka. So it does take time to transition, not just transition, but actually transform. And we've seen that, and I think there are some figures that were actually even mentioned in the UNEP Emission Gap Report about how 85% of CO2 emissions reductions that are needed to achieve the 1.5 degrees target can be achieved with policies and technology endorsed by government and industry across the world, but that cannot be done in 5 years. We can achieve a lot in 10 years, so by 2030, and the NDCs are really trying to achieve that. But we also need to ensure that, and this is something that I've heard many times, especially on Saturday at the summit, there's no need for us to put electricity in cars if the battery of the car is going to become pollution for 100,000 years. There's no point in us having solar panel that are actually not made of biomass. And the Russian Federation has made incredible technological advancement in that respect. So we need to basically be very conscious about how we are moving forward and not just rush and go towards the wrong solution that will actually make the problem even bigger in a couple of decades.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So I would like to come back to Poland, to Katarzyna Guzek from Greenpeace. So Minister Kurtyka set the stage of Polish situation, that it's really special, that in 1989 we had 90% of our energy mix from coal. So how do you see that Poland's dependence on coal has changed over the last 5 years? Can progress be seen, and do we really need this coal? In the end, we must take into account that each country is different.
Yes. I'm involved in the environmental movement for the last more than 15 years, and I participated in 3 climate summits organized in Poland, and I hear this argument that we cannot move fast in the coal phase out because of '89, and because our system was built before '89 and it was based on coal. And to be honest, I'm still surprised to hear this argumentation in 2020, especially taking into account that if you look into the documents, different public documents related to coal-fired power plants in the Polish energy system, you can get into the conclusion that majority of those coal-fired power plants can be shut down by 2035. So it means that Poland, with a little bit more effort, can set up a coal phase-out date by 2030. We are lacking political decision, and I do understand that this decision is difficult to take, especially if for many years the government was in a discussion with the miners and miners' unions without a proper wording, without a proper understanding, or maybe not a proper understanding, but explaining to this particular group of interest that we have we have to phase out coal at some point because we cannot get any longer with this status quo. So that would be my answer to that. We are able to take this ambitious decisions, this short-term ambitious action, just like Professor Niklas Höne mentioned before, and we are just lacking political will. And if I may get back to the previous question, that the question was asked like some time ago, related to the goal, EU goal by 2030, is 55% enough? And I do agree that it's not enough. Climate movement supported by the scientists, but actually the climate movement that was supporting scientists was calling on at least 65%, and this target was on the table during the European Parliament voting. Unfortunately, it was not accepted by the EU Parliament, and therefore we are now stuck with the 55% reduction target, but it's not enough. It should be at least 65.
Thank you very much. So now to Niklas Höne. According to the recent studies, pandemic has caused an unprecedented drop in global CO2 emissions in 2020. Is there a chance that with green recovery plans and rising climate awareness, we will observe a positive effect on the 2030 and 2050 GHG emission levels that would be in line with the Paris Agreement goals?
Yeah, you're right. Greenhouse gas emissions this year are lower, roughly 7% than they were last year. But they're only lower because the economy is down. Once the economy is up again, emissions are up again, and we have not gained anything. And in the large scale of climate, it's a drop in the ocean. It's nothing. So what we really need to do is to completely change our way of working, our economies, away from fossil fuels in the direction of energy efficiency and renewables. And there, the recovery money that is currently spent is the opportunity. You know, somebody said it already before. Governments are spending enormous amounts of money. Actually, if you compare the order of magnitude that's spent right now for COVID, it's 10 times higher than what would be necessary to solve the climate crisis. Yeah, so we have a lot of money available that is spent right now, and if only a little bit.
So why do you think is it so?
Why is it so? Yeah, because I mean we have a very concrete threat to us with COVID pandemic. It's very close. It affects us right away. That is a big difference to the climate. Climate is more in the future, and it's a bit more difficult to get stringent decisions by governments. So in this particular case, since it's affecting all of us, our societies are ready to spend a lot of money on something, which is good because we have a real crisis to deal with. But the trick is to solve two crises at the same time. So to solve the economic crisis that we have, but also the climate crisis. And unfortunately, if you look at what countries are doing right now, you see a few who spend a certain share of this recovery money, and the EU is, I think, a good example. But even in the EU, if 30% are spent for the right thing, then still 70% are either neutral or spent for the wrong thing. And that's the thing. If you look at all countries, you find in all countries actually cases where money is spent for supporting the fossil fuel industry. Although we know we are in this emergency situation, we should actually spend all money in the direction of climate, or at least nothing in the wrong direction. So that's still the situation. We heard before in the gap report, we calculated that if the money goes in the right direction, we could go much, much closer to meeting the Paris goals, like minus 25% or so. That's an order of magnitude, but we are unfortunately not yet there. And again, to end on a positive note, we are still in the middle of the pandemic. Governments can still decide on how to spend recovery money. So it is, I have not given up hope that this money that is spent can really be turned in the right direction. But right now it doesn't look so good.
Thank you. So staying with the COVID-19 pandemic, I would like to ask Romeo Bertolini, what are the effects of the pandemic on the implementation of nationally determined contributions?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, what we did as NDC partnership with our members at the very beginning was we were asking exactly that question. How do you see, dear member countries, your NDC redesign or enhancement and the new round of NDCs being affected? And also, to what extent is the implementation of the NDC affected? And most of the countries were pretty skeptical about their capacity to deal with this in terms of the economic burden they're having. Because remember, we deal a lot with developing countries, as we are a mechanism, a coalition that supports smaller countries that face the challenges of climate change, and we try to work around this. So there was quite a skeptical kind of a grim look at this. And when people started to talk about opportunity that this may have in a transformational sense, I personally thought, okay, isn't this a little bit cynical? We tried to address that, and we got requests from the countries. What can we do right now? And we were thinking, and we were establishing again with all our colleagues from the international organizations, NGOs, and so on and so forth, to establish a network of now 35 to 40 experts that we are providing and that we are sending, so to speak, to ministries of finance and planning in the countries, often locally sourced experts that support the finance and planning ministries to spend the recovery funding and the stimulus programs in a wiser way. And let me share with you one example of a country in Central and South Central Asia. They have established a fund for national development, which was completely not related to anything around green or climate. Now, the stimulus pressure, so to speak, brought in 100 million from the finance minister locally and nationally, and they're now looking to leverage this by 500 million euros in addition of that. So the question was, how do we get access to this funding? How do we get with a pretty low rating we have on the international market, how do we get interesting interest rates here? How do we get a risk covered on that one? And the idea was now, and the idea is now, we're still developing this, to move this fund into something that addresses the challenges of climate change, and therefore being able to attract more attractive funding and better risk, kind of a risk regime in order to make that happen. So we hope for a lot of these kind of examples as we go along with those 35 countries that are getting this kind of support. We very much closely work with the IMF on that, with the World Bank, with many actors, also the Ministers of Finance Coalition on climate change, of which Poland is a member. All of these kind of activities are then brought together. We try to establish a community of learning through these kind of virtual meetings that we all started to love and hate, I suppose, over the year. But obviously, we all see that we can have substantial discussions, and also we reduce the burden of us being on the plains and of the climate being threatened by more and more trips that anyway are now not possible. So this kind of package, this example is for me quite encouraging, and I hope we can learn from each other over the course of the next months and years to come, because this is not going to go away so quickly, right? We need to go along with this topic for another half a year, 2 years, 3 years, at least.
We'll see. Thank you very much for that. So now I'd like to ask Maria Andrzejewska. As already was mentioned, UN Secretary General urged all countries this Saturday to declare climate emergencies. 38 countries has already done it. But it's not only countries that have to work together. It's all of us. How can we help the humanity from committing suicide on the individual level?
Indeed. Well, the individual decisions, that's a very broad topic. So we could discuss it for hours, in fact, and I would like to come back again to the Gap report, because that's in this Gap report we can find that 2/3 of global emissions are linked to private households. So in fact, we have really quite serious influence, and the most, let's say, important and the most obvious areas for activity, that's mobility, that's the energy, building energy efficiency, and also food sector. Maybe I would just refer to what Mr. Kurtyka said at the beginning about the installation of photovoltaic in Poland, that it's increasing, and that's those numbers which we heard about 150,000 households added to photovoltaic, which means that that's around 350,000 of prosumers are right now in Poland. So that's a huge number, and we know here in Poland we have some incentives, financial incentives. So that's helping people to participate in this change. But that's an investment. That's a huge investment for many households. But people decide to make these investments because that's, first of all, I think that they think about the financial benefits they will get, but that there is also this the climate related issues are very much stressed in the communication when we come to this the change related to the energy efficiency of households. But just a few words about the food waste issue. So that's a huge also area for activities, as we are losing around 1/3 of the food production, and which means that with the food that's the loss of the water, which was used for the production of this food, but also energy. And of course, the main issue from my point, one of the main issues from my point of view, that we are losing we are losing 1/3 of the food, and then we have 1 billion of people which are simply hungry. So that's something we have to work on that, and that's also an issue which is maybe not very directly related to the Paris Agreement and all the topics we are discussing today, but they are very important also from the point of view of climate change.
Thank you very much. 1/3 of food being wasted. That's incredibly bad. Okay, so now I would like to ask to go on with this individual perspective into the humanity, another aspect of humanity in action. I mean the social activism. So I would like to ask Katarzyna Guzek, what is, in your view, the role of climate activism today as regards influencing the political decisions on the country and the regional and international level?
I really like to usually I like this kind of questions because it brings us to the world of activism and all those people, very often young people that are taking their perspective to the streets and shouting it loud, writing it on the banners, the different kind of different messages, and we can read them later on in the media, and it can clearly, according to the theory of change, can influence the political debate and also the public opinion. When we Greenpeace activists climb on the cooling tower of the largest lignite-fired power plant in the EU, Bełchatów power plant, with the message call phase out in Poland by 2030, majority of people were not sure what are we talking about, like why are we talking about 2030? They were not sure if it's possible. They thought it's really ambitious what we are asking for. In 2020, 2 years later, this kind of message is well understood. Majority of Polish citizens are supporting this goal. There's also a bigger understanding of the climate crisis in the whole EU, not mentioning the whole world. Also, not only because of organizations such as Greenpeace, but also because of the climate movement, such as Fridays for Future or Polish Młodzieżowy Strajk Klimatyczny. They did amazing work by taking it to the streets, explaining people what it means, 1.5 degrees Celsius degrees. I was watching a press conference of IPCC, different report not related directly to the climate, and scientists were saying clearly that it's because of the climate activists. Their science language was translated into the language that is well understood by the public opinion. And they are very thankful that it is understandable by people. And also the IPCC itself is more known to the people since 2018. So I would say that the role of the climate movement in Poland, in Europe, but also in the world, is to shift a public debate. And by shifting a public debate, also shifting a political decision. So it's sometimes it is taking over tone window, tone. Sometimes it is let's say ambitious, or for some people even not acceptable of what climate movement is demanding. But if we look into the reality that even now as we speak, the global temperature has risen by 1.2 Celsius degrees, and we are on the track to the climate catastrophe, I think this language is crucial. I think this kind of actions, especially non-violent direct actions, demonstrations, protests, of course, they are more difficult nowadays because we are still in the pandemic situation. But things that happened in 2018, 2019, beginning of 2020, and also in some countries nowadays, it's saying that we need this climate action and people are really asking for it. They are demanding it. And I found it very useful and helpful, and also part of the climate politics.
Thank you very much. So now I would like to read one of the questions from our participants, and I would like to ask any of the panelists that will wish to add the answer to it to their questions that I will be asking. We are also, of course, running out of time, so please limit yourself now to 1 minute, preferably. So there is a question on green spending in the context of recovery from the pandemic. It is great to see a higher level of ambition in this regard, especially following last week's European Council decisions. But what measures should be taken to safeguard against greenwashing? This is the question, especially to Mrs. Bardram. So maybe Mrs. Elina Bardram, maybe I will ask you for answering first, because I wanted to ask it actually to Hafida, but I will do that as well. Elina, do you hear us?
Thanks very much, and apologies for a bit of a slow reaction in switching on again. Indeed, greenwashing is a real risk, and we see this at the corporate level, and we see this at government level. And I think as the union, we need to do our utmost to resist any kind of attempts to greenwash, because that would hamper our own credibility as a proponent of ambitious and real robust climate action. So how would we do it? In government-to-government conversations, I don't think we should be endorsing our partnerships or alliances just by default if another country says we too want to be ambitious. That type of articulation needs to be connected with real and concrete commitments to deliver on the net zero emissions, to deliver on NDCs that correspond to that ambition agenda by COP26, and very concrete policies and measures. And it should not be left at the level of political declarations, but rather something that can be evidenced by submissions to the UNFCCC, by actual policies and measures being put in place. So lip service will not suffice. Given the gravity of the situation at the moment, we really do need to see governments put their first or the best foot forward. In terms of corporate level, there is the whole host of the taxonomy. So methodology, standards, and approaches that can be genuinely and verifiably tested and applied across different sectors and activities. We should also make sure that we attach certain conditions to our own external financing and lending policies, as has been already pursued in the case of the EIB, etc. So for the EU, this is a matter of credibility, and we will be pursuing a rigorous agenda in this respect, whilst avoiding unnecessary red tape and bureaucracies, which could actually slow down the progress of investment into the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Just one more question that I still wanted to ask you, but as we are running out of time, please just one sentence answer to the very long question. So presenting the Green Deal means that Europe has a chance of becoming the first carbon neutral continent in the world. After this announcement, a few different countries across the globe presented the same goal: how to ensure that EU is not a lone warrior and stays competitive and relevant when not all the powers commit to that. I've already in a way asked this question to Hafida before.
Well, I think the very short answer of it is that EU is no longer alone. We have seen very serious announcements. We look for much more favorable political conditions, and we are ready to reach out to any government that wants to share our leadership. And we have seen very encouraging signs to that direction. Japan, China, Korea, partners that have committed to serious transformation. And with the incumbent Biden administration and their messages, I think we are really in a turning point on the ambitions journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now I would like to ask Niklas Höhne, because you've already mentioned the shorter implementation and goals. So I would like to ask you for this brief answer: what can we exactly do to make you more satisfied as regards the short-term goals? And also the question from our participant: in order to achieve the goal of the Paris Agreement, how much is it important to reach for negative emissions technologies?
Yeah, I think we already said it, that I mean, the EU is not alone. I fully agree. And we have a critical mass of countries which said that they want to go to zero emissions. So it's really not a question of if we phase out coal, oil and gas. It's only a question on how to do it. And that really is a complete different situation than before. That's what we need to do. So the ambition is very good, and that's actually a very, very positive signal. One signal that we haven't seen, or is the biggest positive news that I've seen in the last 10 years. So that's great. But as I said, the short-term ambition is still not there. And I think that second step is much more difficult than the first. And that still needs to be implemented, and in a fair way and in a just way. It's not an easy transition, but that's basically what we have to work on right now. And the question from the audience on the negative emissions, I think, well, if we are serious about climate, we need to first and foremost reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. It's always easier to solve the problem at the start and not try to clean it up later. And that's why reducing greenhouse gas emissions, we know how to do it. Let's do that first. If that's not sufficient, then we need to prepare for thinking how to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. But that's always the second step, and it should not take attention away from reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you very much. Now off to Hafid Al-Awwal. My last very short question with very short planned answer. What was already asked to Alina, but connected that to general finance flows from UNFCCC. How does UNFCCC ensure that finance flows are consistent with a low GHG emissions and climate resilient pathway?
Yes, so in terms of climate financial climate funds that are flowing from those that have the finance funding and those that need it, this is a very tricky issue for the UNFCCC, especially for me as a secretariat. But what I can say is that as we're talking about ambitions and how to make the goal quite meaningful, right? And the UNEP Emission Gap Report made it very clear that if we put in place a mechanism of accountability on the G20 countries that are responsible for 2/3 of the emissions, the global emissions, and if we take into consideration the fact that we need to ensure that those countries that need it are provided with the opportunity to actually make that transformation, then it's less an issue of us, pushing for that flow, but it's also like the market is actually working so that because we're interconnected and because we want to also work from the UN perspective on the SDGs front, we naturally move towards a few decades where we're working together to ensure that the climate funds, and 100 billion per year is almost not sufficient, right? Everyone is talking about the fact that this is actually nothing compared to actually the massive investment that you need, the technology, innovation, just the research itself that you need for this transformation. I'm actually very hopeful because we have seen, and I think Nicholas mentioned that we have seen in the past few weeks an incredible shift in the mindset of government, of civil society organization, of grassroots movements, where we are realizing collectively that because we're so interconnected, because we need this solidarity and we need this equity, even if legally this is a little bit of a undefined concept. And I think this is actually why we actually probably should finish this webinar on a very positive note, that we are very close to achieving the goal under the Paris Agreement if we are all ensuring that the measures we're taking are very concrete and realistic, obviously.
Thank you. And last question and last intervention, I will expect and ask for to Romeo Bertolini. So also, it would be great if you could end up with some positive note, but the question is about the lessons learned throughout those 5 years and about your recommendations. So constructive, positive note, hopefully.
Yes, I think, I mean, there are enough reasons to be constructive and positive, I think. We've been seeing, and this is something which drives me every day, being a public servant originally, how countries have really, been engaging with us in and asking, requesting support, how to strengthen the position of the environmental ministries vis-a-vis other ministries, right? Which we all know they're in most countries not the strongest part on the cabinet table. And what I saw really and at the beginning, as I said, I needed to explain to agricultural minister in some countries what the NDCs are, and there was no knowledge whatsoever about this. And what we saw on Saturday, and that really struck me big time, was that many leaders of countries, many prime ministers, presidents, and so forth, were referring to NDCs as the underlying principle of the Paris Agreement, just very naturally and very, in a very cool and relaxed manner as the instrument they have at hand. And I think this is something which we really achieved in the last 5 years, to make sure that this concept is established. And I think that there's, as Niklas said, as Minister said, there's a lot of room for improvement, of course, but I think there's also a lot of good examples. We've been, for instance, having an exchange with Namibia. They started to introduce and integrate the water sector in their NDC. We've been seeing Colombia having created economic instruments to tackle climate change through a carbon tax, having emission trading systems and green bonds there. In Francophone sub-Saharan Africa, we have been seeing similar instruments, green and blue bonds, for instance, in Cote d'Ivoire. And if we see these smaller countries, poorer countries as well, advancing, I think the industrialized countries and those that caused partly this mess, so to speak, they need to step up and also make sure they get their act together. And I think we all can look into a hopefully bright next couple of years, where on the global architecture we also have a couple of drivers that we haven't been having in the last couple of years, on top of what we have with the European Union and
yes,
other global leaders.
Fingers crossed for that. So thank you very much for this anniversary conference celebrating the 5th birthday of the Paris Agreement. Our honorable guests today were Minister Michał Kurtyka, Maria Andrzejewska, Elina Bardram, Romeo Bertolini, Katarzyna Guzek, Niklas Hyne, Hafida Laiwell. Thank you very much for being with us. And finally, let us remember that there is no plan B for climate action, as there is no planet B. Have you all a good evening, and goodbye.